first with you, Ambassador Amrani. We're here in Morocco. Morocco has multiple identities, I think you'll agree, but one of those identities, and a very important one, is Atlantic. And so from your perspective, what is it that gives this significance for Morocco, and where do you see the important areas for this to go, these relationships to go in the future for Morocco? Very briefly.
Okay, thank you very much. I think as far as Morocco and we share the same values for democracy, for human rights. And this entitled this country under the leadership and the vision of His Majesty King Mohammed VI to work together towards the Atlantic link. Today, the Atlantic link is a priority in our foreign policy. And you have seen in that pictures, we were the first country in Africa and in the Arab world to have a strategic dialogue and partnership with the US, but not only with the US, with other countries in America. Today I'm very happy because they're in the room, they don't know it maybe, I have two ministers in countries where I served. Castañeda, former Foreign Minister of Mexico. I was ambassador to Mexico. I think there's also Arturo Sarujan, who was my colleague in the foreign ministry, who was here. But also the Minister of Defense of Colombia. I served also as ambassador of Morocco to Colombia. So in fact, Morocco believes strongly in this transatlantic link because of our shared values, as I said in the beginning, but also because of our strategic location. We have established ourselves as a bridge to Europe through the Mediterranean, and later maybe we can talk about this, but also as a gateway to Africa with strong connections to America, to the Americas, if I may say so.
Thank you. Esther, an American perspective on this. I was very struck, we mentioned Atlantic Currents, the volume that we've put together with the Policy Center. I'm very pleased to say Esther wrote one of the really excellent chapters and an excellent set of chapters, but thank you. But I was very struck by a couple of points that you made in there about important but differing security perceptions around the region. And let's extend that to maybe to foreign policy more broadly. A lot of compatible shared interests perhaps, but a lot of different history and a lot of different perspectives on some important issues. So how, is an Atlantic vision in this foreign and security policy space possible?
Well, first, Ian, thank you very much for the question, and thanks both to OCP and to the German Marshall Fund for hosting the Atlantic Dialogues. This is a fantastic gathering, and I look forward to hearing what our panelists and the entire audience have to say about these topics. It may be because now I'm a professor, no longer a diplomat, or because early in my life I was on the policy planning staff, so it's my job to be contrary. And so I'll ask 5 questions to say that I believe deeply in the potential for cooperation and for human progress. But in order to do that, we have to look at the difficult issues and work our way through them. And I think these 5 questions might suggest what those are. The first is the defense of the rule-based order. Many countries in the Atlantic space have seen their role as defending the larger international order and international system. You may argue it's hegemony, or you may argue it's actually being the first one to contribute to Ebola response. Maybe it's being out front on or working on development issues. That said, one of the questions is, will emerging powers be part of the partnership in defending the rules-based order? And I think the response to the invasion of Ukraine gives many pause when answering that question. The second question, what will happen to the economic underpinnings of the transatlantic community? Many countries experience great growth, but in recent years we've seen return to challenging issues within the European Union, challenges for many emerging countries as well. What will happen to the economic underpinnings and what choices will be made? Will the models be the model of Mercosur? Will the model be the Trans-Pacific Partnership? What will be the dynamic models? What will be the impact of TTIP? And I think indeed I would, again, I thank the investor for raising the Brazilian elections. That'll be one of the places where this question will be answered about what economic choices many will make. I will also flag these elections, particularly to the US Senate in November as well. Third, peace and security, perhaps the most difficult area where I see the largest divergences. The first is in the concept of sovereignty, that indeed you have in the European Union countries that have pooled sovereignty to a remarkable level. But also for many countries, including my own, sovereignty is a major political issue. And so if we look at the very different views of the importance of sovereignty being different. I think also the importance of the NATO alliance, which is fundamental to security in the North Atlantic, and which is viewed with great skepticism and wariness by many in the wider Atlantic. That's going to be a difficult issue and important to address. Different views of the path towards denuclearization. And if we look at the importance of dealing with ending the use of the possession of nuclear weapons, we're all part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but there's some very different views as we sit in a nuclear-free zone, yet nuclear weapons remain part of the Atlantic Alliance. What will happen to our global institutions? We have, of course, we're members of the United Nations, but also, what is the future of the Organization of American States? Or is the future UNASUR, which does not include the United States and Canada? What organizations will we work in? And finally, where can we make a contribution? And as I said at the beginning, I believe that we really are capable of human progress. I would flag 2 areas where I think our community can make a real contribution. One is in dealing with the new set of rules. Maybe just because we saw AD Connect, I would say particularly work on the new rules of the internet. And the second is a more profound one. Who are we? Can we provide a positive narrative on identity? At a time when we hear about Novorossiya dividing Eastern Europe, or when the Islamic State uses aberrations to murder those with whom it disagrees, can the transatlantic community, in all of its rich diversity, despite at times our painful history, provide a positive understanding of cultural identity? I think we can. Thank you.
Esther, thank you. Ms. Chinchilla, Costa Rica is a country with, it's a bioceanic country, like my country, the United States. How do you think about this issue of Atlantic vocation and Atlantic identity? How do you balance those things? And from your perspective, in your region, what are the things that will really matter, do you think, in working with Atlantic partners over the next years?
Okay, yeah, I would like to take the opportunity probably to emphasize on some of the issues that were already mentioned, but from the perspective of the Latin American countries, and also from the perspective of the medium-sized and small economies in our region. And concerning our major challenges, I would say that at least I would like to bring 3 important topics. One is the future of the opportunities in terms of trade and investment. As we know, we have now in Latin America many economies that have been successfully performing in terms of trade, open economies. And that is going to be a very important factor in face of a trend that we have here in the Atlantic, but also in the Pacific, and that has to be with the mega regional trade agreements. I think they are instruments that can either hinder or boost the future economic development of our countries. The second issue that I would like to bring in this occasion is the issue of climate change. And from the point of view of the small states in the Caribbean, we are talking about 15 states in the Caribbean, and the small states in Central America. This is a very serious and dramatic problem. I think they are paying a disproportionate impact when it comes to talk about the consequences of climate change. And finally, the other issue is security. And that means basically now, for us in Latin America, the challenge of the transnational organized crime. It is having a terrible impact, a devastated impact on the institutions in our region.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious that all of you want to come into the conversation, and I am going to open it up in just a second. But I just wanted to put a brief question to you all, and you know, think about it in different ways if you'd like. You know, one of the big animating issues across the North Atlantic in certainly the last year, but I think it's older than that, has been an issue of trust. We've had all kinds of crises, political crises, other things that have gotten in the way of this, and it's raised a question about trust. Definitely on the agenda, even in the traditional transatlantic relationships. What about in North-South terms? What about in this four continents relationship? Do we trust each other? Do we trust in each other enough to work confidently on trade or security or the environment or identity issues? What do we think?
Yes.
Please.
I was brief at the beginning. I will take some more time now to maybe express. I think I said we share the same values, but we also share the same threats. Today, I think, as far as this continent is concerned, piracy is undermining the safety of African states, especially in the Gulf of Guinea. Today, 30% of the cocaine which is exported to Guinea comes from the Gulf of Guinea. Traffic on human beings. Now we have this issue of Ebola, which is threatening some African countries looking at the Atlantic. So I think today we can say we have a global threat and we need a global response. Two, I think Miguel Angel have insisted on the Lanzarote initiative. At the beginning, we said we are facing the same threat and we need to have an approach. Miguel Angel did his homework and he gathered some European African countries, and Morocco gathered the 23 countries from looking at the Atlantic from the African. And we said the same, we had the same vision, and we said we need a concerted and pragmatic approach to face these kind of challenges. Based on security, yes, it's important. We need trust to be able to work between intelligence, between the Ministry of Interior to fight this kind of threat. But security is not a unique response. We need economic development, and this, I think, is one of the priority of our program. Without creating jobs, without promoting growth, we cannot fight against terror, and we cannot fight against poverty, which is now the source. And today, and Miguel Angel said, Ahmed Chinchilla was saying, there is a new world, there are new threats. Don't forget that we have close to ours, Mojao, we have Al-Qaeda in the Sahel, and this is linked to the Atlantic and to the Gulf of Guinea. All this traffic, the connection today is evident between the terrorists and the radicalist movement in the Sahel and drug trafficking in Gulf of Guinea. So we need a balanced approach based on this triple economic and human dimension. No, you were saying something important. We need some tools to be able to respond to this kind of threats. We need trust, of course, but we need tools. There are tools now. There are bilateral tools. Morocco, the US dialogue. We're working with the other friends from Latin America within this gathering of South American states, ASA, and Africa, and South America and Arab world. This is a dialogue, but I think it's important also to look for some coherence, because today we have a lot of initiatives, and we need to have coherent responses to this threat. So I think today there is this new context that help us to work together within agreed perception, because I think there is no difference between us. We need economic development. But now let me conclude by saying that today Africa is a priority, not only for Europe within this Africa-EU dialogue, which is not working, by the way, but it is a priority also for the other countries in America, in North America and South America. President Obama, yes, you pointed out very well that this year, for the first time, he gathers all the head of states of Africa and the US, because Africa is a country of opportunity for the future. We have possibilities of growth in the region. We have possibility of making business, because at the end of the day, to be able to fight terror, to fight poverty is to create jobs, and to promote growth is to make business. And in this connection, Morocco, as I said, is a gateway to Africa. We have successful story doing business in Africa. I think this aspect is very important.
I didn't want to make the conversation all about obstacles. I also wanted to talk about some opportunities, and that's actually a good opportunity to shift to engaging all of you in the conversation. And we wanted to do this maybe just starting off using AD Connect. there can be a tag cloud exercise that we can do precisely on this question of opportunities. And so I would ask you, and I think my colleagues are primed to do this on the screen here. We'll do this very briefly, and then we're going to go to all of you for comments and questions. In a word, and I'll tell you how to do this, tag cloud actions on AD Connect, and then you'll be able to type in a word and press send. But in a word, what do you see as the biggest unexploited opportunity for cooperation around the Atlantic? In a word, what should we be doing? This is an obstacle. We're back to obstacles again. Let's move to opportunities. Actually, yeah, there you go.
Trade.
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 One of the great advantages of having confused my colleagues is that we actually got a wonderful combination of both opportunities and obstacles, which actually allows us to talk about some of the differences in perception, because obviously a lot of these things are both. But thank you all very much for contributing to that. We're going to save that. Let me just turn to all of you now for very brief comments and questions, and if you would just tell us who you are and where you're from when you do that, that would be great. And we have microphones to come to you as well. Maybe Marcus, you're right here. Let me start with you. Please.
My name is Marcus Freitas. I'm from Brazil. Good to see you again, Esther. My question is this. When BRICS was established, one of the greatest difficulties was to set up a common agenda. And I think the Indians did a very good job at bringing development to the table. I think cooperation in the wider Atlantic is hard to find because if we don't find one common issue that we could start working on. You've listed several. Which one would you say is the most important one? Is it ending poverty, like the World Bank's pursuing? Is it drug trafficking? Or is it corruption, which is a common thread all over the world nowadays? Which would you single out as the most important item for cooperation? Thank you.
So please, the priorities. What do we pick? What do we work on first?
Well, of course, when we talk about any issue of the global agenda, everything has to do with the well-being of our people. Yeah. For example, one of the more common news on the international newspapers and in any newspaper now has to do with migration. But migration is not the problem. The problem is what is behind the migration issue, why the people has to leave their countries. So I think, of course, we have the challenge of promoting a right development agenda so we can be able to bring to our people a good nation to make a living. And from that point of view, I understand that we have common challenges to create the right environment inside of our nations. And we have many common lessons probably to share and to learn from each other, so how to create the best possible environment at home. But at the same time, we have to use the international organizations and the cooperation to help to create those conditions. So if I will be in the situation to choose just one at the international level, at the cooperation level, I will identify trade, unidentified trade. And it's very interesting to see that people think that trade is the obstacle in the Atlantic. Probably if you had put there the Pacific, people had said is the advantage. Trade is the most important issue because it creates opportunity for prosperity in our nations. We only have two options, let me tell you. Or we export our people, or we export the goods that our people can produce. And so we have to create the right opportunities so in our countries we can have the production and we can get the markets to sell those services and those products.
Okay.
Let me say something answering our colleague. I would say before tackling the priority, I'm talking from the southern perspective. I think we should do also our own homework before tackling the international community. And our own homework is regional integration. I think you were successful in Latin America to succeed in the regional integration. Centro de Integración en Centroamérica, Mercosur, Comunidad Andina, you were successful. I think we need to do our own homework in Africa as far as building up a strong Maghreb and also the African unity. As far as there are no priorities for countries of the South today, I think it's a balanced approach we should. Trade, yes, it's essential, but trade without security is nothing. Trade without trust is nothing. I think today, if I have to choose a priority for us, is the human dimension of the development, education. This is the most important, to be able to fight against illegal migration. You remember, Maratinos, when we started this Rabat Plus on migration, we said we cannot only use security measures to prevent migrants from Africa going to Europe. We need to invest in Africa. We need to create jobs in Africa. We need to promote growth in Africa because security alone cannot. So for me, the human dimension is essential. When I say human dimension, it means education, agriculture, health. This is, I think, what the people, of course, and security to stabilize. I don't know if somebody was talking that we don't want to need any fragile states in the region. This issue of the respect of independence of strong countries, because failed states cannot implement policies in this field.
Let me go right over here. Yes, please. If we could have a microphone just there, please.
Thank you. My name is Vishwanath, and I am a fellow of an Indian think tank called Gateway House from Mumbai. I wish to make a short comment. The presence of Costa Rica in the form of Senora Lara Sanchillo, I think it gives a unique value addition to your Atlantic dialogues, going beyond what you have put in the agenda. Here is a country which has abolished armed forces voluntarily on its own in the history of the modern world. It has set an example for the rest of the world. And this country, sitting in the midst of so much of uncertainty, instability, conflict, civil war, and it has survived and it has flourished, and it has set up a university of peace. I think it would be worthwhile for the Atlantic dialogue to add this to the agenda. Of course, United States, big powers, cannot follow this example, but there are a number of countries which can certainly follow this one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a very interesting point. And
Thank
one
you
that
very
we
much.
I mean, the North Atlantic produces a lot of big animating conflicts, and there may not be such animating conflicts in the South Atlantic, but it doesn't really mean it's a secure place, does it? I mean, if we talk about personal security or human security, Esther.
Indeed. At first, to follow up on the presenter's question and comment that to say that at first, and then to commend your particularly the remarkable example that your country has set, but to also commend many of the countries in the Atlantic region for their contribution to peacekeeping, which uses the skills of military and police forces to help bring greater stability. And whether it's Brazil in Haiti or Congo or the Mediterranean, or whether it's India's long and distinguished contribution to peacekeeping, there are roles, and the question is what are they and how for the select use of military force. Indeed, the great cooperation in the Indian Ocean to combat piracy, which brings together countries from very, very different parts of the world to combat piracy. There are these important models, and the question is, when are those appropriate? How do we think about that? I think is important as well. But indeed, human security, I think, is also important, which is understanding that ultimately it's not the well-being of states, but the well-being of people. So I was so happy that you added education to that list, because in addition to trade and investment, and I would say to health, I would add education, which is very much part of helping the next generation take leadership roles and providing opportunity and social inclusion for all of our societies. And all of the countries, including my own, have work to do in this area.
Elon.
Yes, I want to answer the question. Which are the priorities to overcome the obstacles? Corruption? From my modest point of view, corruption is everywhere, unfortunately. Opportunities, yes. Trade, energy. Nobody say about energy. But now, well, sometime when we used to call the Gulf, we were all thinking about the Persian or Arab Gulf. Well, we have to think about the Gulf of Guinea in terms of oil and gas today. People are shifting to the Gulf of Guinea, so there is a lot of potential. Trade, enormous potential. So the question, for me, the priority is to combat ignorance, because people don't think what is going on today in Africa and the possibilities. And secondly, you have to create connectivity. You cannot have a successful and intense trade if you don't have a communication, transport, and the way to really exchange goods and capitals and services. So if there is political will and there is intention to create this new relationship, you will overcome. If not, we will continue like today, that we will have a good exchange of views today,
Exactly.
but at the end, the lack of knowledge of each other will continue.
May I add something about NATO? I think it's important. I think NATO is now changing. And we, with Moratinos, we worked a lot within the NATO-Med dialogue. And then came later on what they call the Istanbul Initiative, which was an initiative of NATO looking at the Gulf. Today, as I think we agreed, there is a need to maybe reshape the role of NATO because of the security threat and the development initiatives in the Southern Atlantic. Maybe NATO should think within the discussion today on the NSC, the new security concept, that some importance given to the South Atlantic. While we could imagine, I think, a dialogue like with the Mediterranean partners with NATO, with the countries of the Atlantic, the South Atlantic, like they have, you know, Jose Miguel, what the kind of dialogue we have. Because today there is this Sahel, the situation in Sahel is linked to the Mediterranean, and the situation in the Mediterranean is linked to the European. Security threats are the same. So that's why Morocco had made some proposals in whether in the Chicago NATO summit and the last one, when we're talking about the new strategic concept that this region is given a priority within the NATO perspectives.
I'm conscious of our time, and I did want to come back to our group here for one last quick questions. But before we do that, let me go just right over here in front.
Not working. Hello, my name is Margot Le Guen. I am part of the Emerging Leaders Program. Mrs. Chinchilla, thank you very much for mentioning climate change as a common issue or common opportunity. I work on climate adaptation in West Africa, and I was wondering if you could tell us more how you see the Atlantic community enhance collaboration on this particular issue, and you know, why the Atlantic community could bring more than with global discussions on this issue. Why not having a discussion with other countries, including in Asia and in other part of the world, would be, productive. Thank you.
So environment in the Atlantic.
The environment.
And why Atlantic rather than global for environment and climate?
Yeah, we're talking about environment, isn't it?
Yes.
About the environment. The point you made about environment and climate and as a subject for Atlantic cooperation. And should it be global or is the Atlantic meaningful?
Has to be.
Okay.
Well, when you analyze the situation, the dramatic situation that those small countries I already mentioned are going through, and if you put a number on the price they are paying, the Latin American Commission, the Economic Commission, the CEPAL, has estimated that the effects of climate change is costing to those countries about 5% of its GDP annually. But it is not only because they are paying, it is that what is at stake is its existence as a nation, because some of them are very small, and if we do not reverse the current situation, they are condemned to disappear. And when you go to the other side of the coin and analyze the cost just to comply with the Kyoto commitments, that will mean that the big nations, the industrialized nations, will have to invest less than 1 point of their GDP to comply with the Kyoto rules. So that means that we have to act at a global level. The big emitters of carbon have to act and have to, implement the Kyoto rules. At the same time, in the short term, I would say that the best instruments we have at hand are the NAPAs, the adaptations programs that are ruled by the United Nations Climate Change Convention. But that means that also we have to put money to assist those nations to implement the NAPA so they can be able at least to mitigate the effects of climate change. So we have to act both at the global level and also at the local level.
Great. So before we end, and I am really conscious of the time, I'm going to get us back on schedule, or at least close. I did want to just engage in a little thought experiment with you, if I could, and I apologize to all of you out there. I saw other hands who wanted to come in, but I'm sure you will in other sessions. But a little thought experiment. We have this discussion next year at Atlantic Dialogues. What are we going to be talking about up here in this session? What is the new thing? Maybe it's things that are already on the agenda, but what are we going to be talking about when we discuss this next year? Maybe I could start with you, Miguel.
Well, I'm sure that we will recall this introductory session in order that we need more and more Atlantic dialogue. We need more and more, or we should create a kind of institutionalized mechanism in order to fill the gap still existing between the two shores of the Atlantic, and that the threat of today, the opportunity of today are going to be even intensified. The threat of security, narco-traffic, health, Ebola, and the opportunities, trade, energy, new relationship. So either we start immediately, the sooner we start to really advance in our relationship, the better. And next year we will, even underline that we were right to establish the path for the next step to be taken.
Ms. Chinchilla, what are we going to be talking about next? What should we be talking about next year?
What should we?
Next year. We're sitting here again.
Well,
what's going to be the big issue?
I think that what is important is to really analyze how the instruments that we already have in place are impacting on the real issues. That is something that is very, very important. The second issue is that I think we have to bring key actors from the private and corporate sector and free and organized civil society. Because when we look at the way some nations and some regions are solving part of the problems, they have to do not only with a public response, with cooperation among the governments, but also with the different activities that are reuniting many people from the both corporate and the civil society. So I think also that should be a emphasis that we should bring to these dialogues.
Esther.
Perhaps
a crystal ball.
Oh, well, that's always dangerous. But perhaps maybe we could talk about how far we've gotten on a proposal, which would be, if we think of all the bilateral work, whether it's the 100,000 strong of sending students to other countries, couldn't we do that across the Atlantic? Maybe I'll challenge some of our foundation friends to say, and in fact, why not have a proposal where you say we'll have 100,000 students in the Atlantic area, and we will have a 5-year exchange which would plan to send them to universities in other countries and link that to the corporate community which would commit to give them their first job when they're out. Maybe we could look at a procedure, something like that.
Terrific.
Okay,
Ambassador.
As our objective is to build up a zone of peace, stability, and shared prosperity, I think we should build more bridges. More bridges with the new tools, new actors, civil society, new tools. And in this connection, it's a question for you. Can we use the tools of the North Atlantic to South Atlantic? It's one of question, maybe. Or should we do something else? But the most important is to build bridges for the zone of peace and stability based on shared values and, of course, trust, which is essential.
Okay. Whenever you have these big picture discussions, there's always a little bit of a risk that you don't really get to substance. But I hope you'll all agree with me, we did that. And before we have our coffee break, would you please just join me in thanking all of our speakers for this extraordinarily rich discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let me just add my thanks to Ian's, to everyone on the panel. I think you got us off to a terrific start. And before we release you all for the coffee break, I'm going to pick up the building bridges metaphor to say I need you all to help me build a bridge to dinner, which is after the coffee break, we are having the second plenary session. And immediately following that session, I need everybody who's joining us at the opening dinner to get on the buses because the dinner is off-site. So if you were planning on running to your hotel room after the session before dinner, do it now. And I know that means foregoing the coffee break, but we don't want you left behind when all the rest of us get on the buses and go to dinner. So just to remind, we'll leave right after the next session for dinner. So with that in mind, please enjoy the coffee break, and we look forward to continuing.
Thank you. Thank you very much.